Yeah, good afternoon and welcome to the Cryosphere Pavilion. My name is Christina and I'm a geophysicist at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And I would like to introduce our next session entitled Permafrost and Wellbeing in the Arctic. We will have 5 speakers and our first speaker will be Gustav Hugelius from Stockholm University. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction and welcome to this session where we'll be talking about permafrost and well-being in the Arctic. So this will actually be about it will be about both the well-being of human communities and a little bit about ecosystem well-being as well. So as mentioned by Christina, we have 5 speakers. I'll start and then we'll run through all of us and then end with Edward at the very end. So the first talk that I will present on behalf of many colleagues is actually basically it's all focused around one paper that is coming out soon, and it's a transdisciplinary comparative risk analysis trying to put together a risk framework for analyzing key risks of Arctic permafrost thaw. So you see the names of the lead authors here, Susanna, Johanna, and Alexandra. But it's all done within the EU Nonatario consortium that has been collaborating with local and indigenous experts as well on this work over the past years. So just starting out with the basic idea is this is an example of an impact of permafrost thaw. This is from the Mackenzie River Delta region in northwestern Canada. So you see obviously the risk or the hazard to the infrastructure, but there are also a lot of other elements here. You also have the aquatic ecosystem, you have the terrestrial ecosystem, you have the ecosystems where food is being harvested, you have the transport ways, etc., etc. There are a lot of facets to how changes in this environment and permafrost thaw impacts human communities. This study is sort of transdisciplinary study that has focused on, so it's 4 local regional studies of communities around the Arctic. And the idea is that we've studied 4 quite different communities with the hope of being able to make inferences about different processes affecting different parts of the Arctic and trying to make some assessments that are valid for a wider part of the Arctic region. So the regions are in Canada. We call it the Beaufort region around Inuvik, Aklavik, Tuktoyaktuk. In Russia, the Bolinsky Peninsula area, and then in Svalbard, the Longyearbyen settlement, and in northwestern Greenland, the Avannaata municipality with Qaanaaq and Ilulissat. And in all of these places, there's been combinations of natural sciences investigations, but also a lot of focus on engaging with local and indigenous communities to really understand what the key risks are and how they are perceived and handled. So it's been a 7-year process in total with a lot of initial primary data collection, but that has then fed into a risk analysis that was, with 2 steps of data collection and then a collection within the consortium, and then a lot of workshops in the different areas, internal exchanges between social sciences and natural sciences experts, but then also bridging to local and indigenous experts in all of these regions. And the sort of first steps of what have come out is an overarching risk framework, which is then visualized here. This is sort of the first, it's in 3 parts. You'll see the final part later on. But we sort of arranged it by groups of physical processes that are then in turn linked to key hazards, so different types of hazards, which is in turn in the next phase linked to sort of societal outcomes of those hazards. So the physical processes that we've looked at are changes in climate and weather, terrestrial and subsea permafrost degradation, other human influences, more direct, ground instabilities and erosion, changes in flora and fauna, and hydrological changes, and changes to biochemical cycles. So it's a sort of wide array of physical processes that translate into infrastructure failure, disruption of mobility and supplies, decrease in water quality, challenges of food security, and exposure to infectious diseases and contaminants, which are the key hazards that I've been trying to group and look at and see the impacts. And you'll note that there are links between the processes and the hazards, that have different width, which actually basically represents the different perception, both from the scientists, but also from the local experts of how strong these links are perceived to be. And then the hazards then link to groups of societal consequences. So that can be culture and language, health and well-being, cost and economy, ecosystems, recreation and being in nature, and planning and fate control, which is the final sort of societal consequence of these hazards that have been identified. And again, different strengths of the linkages between them. Now, so for all of these cases, there was this sort of built on a consortium, internal ranking, and then local expert evaluation of the near final product. So there were multiple local workshops, and then sort of towards the end of the project, which the project ended now last year, there were local expert evaluations of the final framework in Inuvik, Klavik, Ilulissat, and Longyearbyen. Unfortunately, due to sort of travel constraints, we couldn't do an evaluation in the Russian location. So we tried to instead work together with social science experts that have been working in that region for decades to get at least some local input there as well. And now this has led to sort of risk maps, semi-quantitative risk maps based on the natural science drivers and the perception from all of these communities. So in the paper, you will find detailed risk maps for all the communities separately. I'm not going to go through them here in the sort of interest of time, but instead I'm going to show you just this summary slide where you have all of the different societal consequences of permafrost thaw together with the different hazards that we talked about. And you see that the colors here are the different regions. So you have the legend there with the sort of purple being the Mackenzie Delta region, and then green the Russian region, yellow Longyearbyen, and orange the Greenland region. So what we can see is that the strengths of these hazards and the link are quite different between the different communities. The Mackenzie River region has sort of the strongest perceived feedback to several of the hazards, but you also see that the top two ones, infrastructure failure and disruption of mobility and supplies, those are relatively strong in all of the regions. Meanwhile, if we look to the very bottom, the sort of concerns and actual feedbacks from exposure to infectious diseases and contaminants are still relatively minor, which also agrees with sort of the general picture that we had coming into this from the natural sciences. There are threats, but they are still being in the future. When it comes to food security, it's quite interesting that there are quite strong hazards or problems or risks in two of the regions, so the Mackenzie Delta and the Russian region, but very minor in the other two regions. And decreasing water quality, that hazard exists in all of the regions, but it's smallest in the Russian region. And I'll just sort of wrap up by saying that this is also summarized in an overarching chapter called The Big Picture of sort of risk or hazard analysis that's included in the recently published Arctic Permafrost Atlas. So you will find an overview, sort of popular scientific overview of the whole process in that atlas, in addition to the paper that is soon coming out. And then this atlas is freely available online. You can order copies or download it through the web page of Grid Arendal. And there's also a QR code there if someone wants to find it online. So you can either access the PDFs or actually order a printed copy, because the printed copies are already running out. And then just finally saying that this is part of a paper that is very soon coming out in the journal Communication, Earth and Environment, and you see the long list of co-authors there that have contributed to this. There's also a very large data set that lists all of the outcome from the interviews and the natural and social sciences that's available already on Zenodo if you were interested in learning more about the data set. And with that, I'd like to thank you. And I'll note that the contact there to the lead author of the paper, if you want to get in touch with Susanna, who has really been leading this work together with colleagues from all of these different universities. Okay, thanks. So I think same as earlier sessions, we will run through the talks and then we'll do a question and sort of discussion session at the very end. So with that, I'd like to actually hand over the word to Elchin from the Woodwell Climate Research Center.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Today I'm presenting on behalf of my colleague, Dr. Susan Natalie. And as always, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm presenting also on behalf of the Permafrost Pathway Project, a collaborative initiative of the Woodwell Climate Research Center that is dedicated to advanced scientific research and equitable solutions to permafrost thaw. This project also involves direct partnership with 10 Alaskan Native communities that lives in the western part of Alaska, and that's contributed heavily to this project. And this presentation being shared with you with their permission. So we know that the current temperature rise showing that we are well above 2 degrees C and heading to the trajectory that could have far more severe consequences for the Arctic region. So permafrost is one of the most alarming consequences and drivers of that warming. And here is the current state of the permafrost. And we know that the estimates telling us that we would lose substantial amount of the current permafrost into the future. So this is 2100. But the one thing that we also know, if we're going to keep our global temperatures below 2 degrees C, then the loss might be, the loss of the permafrost land might be only 20 to 25%. So that said, it's extremely critical to keep the targets at 2, even better below 2 degrees C. And it's been already mentioned multiple times, the positive feedback of the thawing permafrost is that when the permafrost gets warmer, then there's more previously frozen ground becomes available to microbes to basically like chew on this available organic matter and release it either vertically to the atmosphere or laterally to the groundwaters. But in any case, this is adding more carbon to the atmosphere that, as a result, contributes to warmer temperatures. So, So, however, permafrost is also major adaptation issue. The loss of the permafrost soil is exacerbating threats to well-being and survival of those who live in the Arctic, many of whom are indigenous people. Rising temperatures and climate hazards are catalyzing irreversible changes to the Arctic landscape and threatening the survival of communities across the circumpolar north. In Alaska alone, the U.S. government estimates that at least 144 indigenous communities will be affected by the thawing permafrost. These threats have more tangible and widespread impacts on lives and livelihoods of those who live in these communities. So the impacts as following: destabilizing infrastructure, schools, railroads, and other vital infrastructure for the Arctic. Compounding natural disturbances include wildfire and extreme weather events, such as typhoons, that's becoming more and more frequent and more severe as global temperatures have risen. So permanent alterations of the natural landscapes leads to alterations in hydrology, resulted in more drainage, coastal and riverine erosion. Subsistence fishing in Alaska is currently at unprecedented risk and continues to face loss of thousands of years of indigenous stewardship. research suggests that at least 4.3 billion is needed for the next 50 years to protect infrastructure just in Alaska. If we're going more globally, then it's going to be, according to the estimates, 30 to 50% of the critical infrastructure is at high risk by 2050 as a result of permafrost thaw. So the estimated total damage for the circumpolar is about $276 billion. For many Arctic communities where extreme events have compounded permafrost thaw, we know that tipping point is occur or likely to occur whether or not we keep the global temperatures below 2 degrees C. And immediate action is needed and the response from the US government. And here was the video talk by one of the members of the project and partner, Maurice Alexei from Nunarpachuk, who actually explains very well this problem, but unfortunately it looks like there is some technical issues. We're not going to play the video. We're going to move on. So with this leads to the necessary solution. The gaps in permafrost data are currently limiting our ability to address the climate crisis. We currently don't have integrated strategic approach to accurately track and predict carbon emissions from thawing permafrost and help mitigate local impact of permafrost thaw on Arctic communities. This is the fundamental science and knowledge gap that we are seeking to fill on a permafrost pathway. So as COP is focused on catalyzing climate finances, it is helpful to remember that investing in hazard mitigation will save us on a long run. And with that, I'll let you to read our conclusion, and I'll stop there. Thank you, and I'll introduce our next speaker, Fabian. Please take over.
Thank you very much, and you're welcome to my presentation. My name is Fabian Seemann, and I'm a PhD candidate at the ILLUQ Institute in Potsdam, Germany. I'm going to present you the ILLUQ project, which is a new EU Horizon project, which has just started in the beginning of 2024. And it's sort of the follow-up project from the Nunatalia project, which Lucia introduced to you, or summarized for you. So ILLUQ focuses on processes, consequences, and risks that are derived from permafrost thaw that are relevant for local communities in the Arctic. And it does this on a holistic approach. And as the consequences that are relevant for communities are addressed here, the research is also conducted together with the communities. So the research priorities are developed together, research is conducted together, and also evaluated together. A central role in this project plays the aspect or the concept of One Health. And what that means, I'm going to explain to you during my presentation. The project covers a variety of natural settings, such as low Arctic environments with sporadic permafrost to high Arctic environments with continuous permafrost. And it's also covering different social and cultural settings. One of the main questions in this project is, how does permafrost thaw impact well-being in the Arctic? I'm going to give you some practical examples on that in my presentation. But first of all, I would like to present to you a community survey on impacts of permafrost thaw. And here the question has been, have you been affected by some of these physical changes when traveling in your surrounding environment? And these are the answers that were given. In the uppermost row, it's a town in Greenland. Then Longyearbyen in Svalbard, and on the lowest row, Klavik in northern Canada. And first of all, you can see that people receive a variety of physical changes occurring in the environment, and they are not only limited to permafrost thaw, of course. For example, in Greenland, sea ice dynamics are much more perceived than in Longyearbyen or in northern Canada, where erosion processes or wetland increase in wetland area is more felt by the communities. So now I'd like to introduce you to the concept of One Health. The One Health approach recognizes that human health is closely related to the health of animals and the environment. This is especially important in the Arctic, where people are very closely related to nature, but this concept has certainly applied in permafrost environments. And as an example, with climate change, permafrost starts to degrade. That means ground ice is melting, through which the ground is subsiding. And this has multiple impacts. For example, on the ecosystem, as for example, wetland areas are increasing, which changes the animal populations in this ecosystem, which again has consequences for the communities, as for example, hunting grounds are changing. And on the other hand, ground subsidence has impacts on infrastructure, as we have also been hearing by ILLUQ so far. But One Health also recognizes that there's not only physical health of human, which is impacted by permafrost thaw. So physical health impacts are, for example, chemical hazards such as contaminant release, and we'll talk about this in a second. Geohazards such as the ground subsidence and the impact for infrastructures, and also biohazards. But there are also other health aspects, such as mental health aspects. So permafrost thaw can lead to increased stress, feeling of powerless, loss of control, and even increased risk of drug and alcohol consumption, and towards suicidal thoughts as well. Then there are impacts for the behavioral health, such as the disruption of land-based activities and damages to cultural identity. And lastly, also spiritual health aspects, such as the disruption of traditional lifestyles and the connectedness to nature. And furthermore, also these aspects are also all interlinked with each other. And this is a big topic in ILLUQ. So to some hands-on examples from infrastructure problems, for example, 33% of communities that are located on permafrost are also located at the coast. And with increased climate warming, coastal erosion rates are expected to be increasing 2 to 3-fold until the year 2100. This is already a big challenge for communities today, and also even the relocation of towns is an upcoming problem. This is already occurring and will occur in the future as well. Towards linear infrastructures such as runways, roads, and railways, the ground subsidence, which I have introduced to you earlier, which is also called thermocast, can be a local problem, which has, however, large impact. So in this image, you can see the Alaskan Highway in the Yukon Territory close to Whitehorse, and you can see a thaw slump developing here. And as this is expanding, it will likely reach the highway at some point, leading to big disruptions. As another example, pollutants in the Arctic. Waste management is a huge problem in the Arctic because there are a lot of logistical and high economic efforts connected to waste management. Landfills are often used by Arctic communities, and they, for example, can warm themselves. Because when microbial activity starts, it decomposes the material that is filled in these landfills. It warms the ground and potentially thaws the surrounding permafrost, leading to the seepage of pollutants. There are more than 13,000 contaminated sites in the Pan-Arctic, and fossil fuels are occurring mostly. This can be due to the oil industry, at drilling sites, at mine tilings, as well as storage and tanks, as well as pipelines. And with With the continuation of climate warming, there's an increased risk for toxic substance mobilization. As my last example, I would like to talk about the freshwater supply. There is a lack of access to groundwater in the Arctic where permafrost is present. So often, lakes are being used as the freshwater source for communities. But as climate continues to warm, there are potential factors that influence freshwater quality, such as the emergence of contaminants, what I just talked about, increase of biological growth, such as through algae, increased sediments load, for example, through erosion, and also infiltration of saline sediments and water at coastal communities. Additionally to that, there's also the risk of total loss of freshwater sources. In this picture, in this picture series, we can see a thermokarst lake that has drastically drained in 2022 during just a few days. And it has been a freshwater source for people living there. So it can have high impacts here as well. So to my conclusions and outlook, permafrost thaw has cascading effects that are very relevant for Arctic well-being. I haven't touched on the adaptation costs, but they can skyrocket up to $182 billion US by the year 2050. And with continuous climate warming, the Arctic also remains under pressure. And with that, I'm coming to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And I would like to introduce to you the Arctic Permafrost Atlas. Gustav has done this already. So I will hand over now to Annette. Yeah, Annette Barsch is coming next.
So we have a look now specifically at settlements located along the Arctic coast, the entire Arctic coast actually, because this is where we can use satellite data, or what satellite data allows us to do. Now, the highest rates of ground warming, we see them, they occur along the coastal areas. And then in addition, what we can observe, there is the change in the sea ice extent, what means with the decreasing sea ice extent, we have a longer season, which is ice-free, what means also more coastal erosion, potentially more coastal erosion at the same time. So we have these increasing, and these increasing ground temperatures also mean that we have an increasing depth of the seasonal thaw layer, actually 5 centimeters per decade on average for the entire northern hemisphere. And there are regions where this is much, much stronger. And this increase of thaw depth is can result in subsidence, what is also in addition and is an issue for infrastructure, for settlements across the Arctic. In addition, and this is an account of which settlements across the Arctic are or will be soon affected by just coastal erosion. So that's addressing this one issue, and we use satellite data to identify rates of coastal erosion across the entire Arctic. And in addition, satellite data at a very high detail to identify infrastructure across the Arctic at a 10-meter resolution that's also featured in the Permafrost Atlas. So it's a novel data set, and we combined this information and extrapolated these rates. So all these, the points, we can see the red ones, so all the circles are settlements affected by coastal erosion, coastal, or will have an issue in the future. And that's actually, by the 2100, it will be 20% of all the settlements along the Arctic coasts. So at the same time, we have these increasing ground temperatures, and this information what is behind here, it's also satellite data. It's land surface temperature measurements which have been used to model the ground temperature conditions. And we see, well, okay, on the one hand, we have the general increasing ground temperatures, and then also the regions where we have an enhanced increase of active layer thick. So this thaw depth. Those are the brown areas. And actually the areas which are brown, that's where also these settlements which are affected by coastal erosion are located. So we have two of these issues, both issues that the settlements, the people living there are facing. And it's actually of this the settlements which are affected by coastal erosion, a third of that is even facing a thaw depth or an increase of thaw depth by more than a meter in addition of what we have today. And on top of that, what is less discussed until now is the rise in sea level. And we actually, when we look at projections for 2100 for the rise in sea level, we have almost half of the settlements along Arctic coastlines will be, at least, or the infrastructure will be at least partially submerged, if these projections are correct. So we have multiple issues, and overall, 2/3 of Arctic settlements will face at least one of this, what I listed, mentioned. Coastal erosion, the increasing, substantial increase of active layer, the thaw depth, and sea level rise. And some of them, more than 10%, will face 3 of these problems. So that's just is coming out, this very new study based to a large extent on satellite observations. So thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah. Okay, just introduce you. So we have one final speaker, Edward from the Gwich'in Council, who will tell us. I'm not sure exactly what he's going to tell us about, but
Yeah, me either.
We have a separate presentation.
See if my presentation gets pulled up here. All right, Masi Chol, Shojri Edward Alexander Oji, Guchajek, Watsanitliga, Tanan Guchi. In my language, I just told you thank you all for coming here, and I appreciate you being here. I'm originally from Fort Yukon, but the town that I live in now is called Fairbanks, and in our language, in Gwich'in language, we call it Tanan. You might have heard that word when I just introduced myself, and it means permafrost in Gwich'in. So I'm literally from permafrost and live in permafrost now. And so I'm the co-chair and head of delegation for Gwich'in Council International. Gwich'in Council International represents all of these member governments up here on top, the Vuntut Gwich'in First Nation in the middle, the Council of Athabascan Tribal Governments on the left, and on the right, the Gwich'in Tribal Council. Those are all of the regional governments of the Gwich'in people in Alaska, the Yukon Territory, and the Northwest Territory. There's a map of our homelands, and so in a few of the other presentations today, you saw the community of Aklavik mentioned. That's a Gwich'in community. Inuvik is also a Gwich'in and Inuvialuit community. My home is right here in Fort Yukon. We're a member of the Arctic Council, and so I serve as the head of delegation for Gwich'in Council International to the Arctic Council. And we sit and serve with all of the other member states of the Arctic Council. I want to kind of decenter some of our permafrost discussion today. Like, there was acute discussion about what was happening to local communities, what happens to a home when it's on permafrost, that kind of thought. I've experienced those things. I've lived those things. I've moved my home from falling into a river. I've been a part of moving infrastructure due to thaw and permafrost and so forth. But permafrost thaw goes beyond that. It affects the globe as a whole, and that's kind of, I wanted to kind of change the aperture of the discussion a little bit. And so, and to remind you that permafrost is the natural infrastructure that holds up this world, right? And it's doing the lion's share of lifting as the largest terrestrial carbon sink on planet Earth. And so, decentering some of the impacts of permafrost thaw from just the local neighborhood a little bit, remembering that, you know, in this abrupt thaw scenario, it's not just communities in the Arctic that are going to be affected by sea level rise, by erosion, by all of these things with permafrost thaw. It's going to be communities all over the world. And so, again, when we think about wellness and permafrost, you know, you think about the Arctic and whether or not it's well, permafrost, and whether or not its well-being, it's feverish right now, right? It's beyond feverish. It's literally on fire. And so we've seen, you know, this massive amount of fires that have been occurring in our region. And when we think about the impact of those fires, the destabilization of Yedema, the destabilization of permafrost as a whole, we have to think about the health of this entire ecosystem. And so this is a picture from my neck of the woods. This is a picture from the Yukon Flats of a wildland fire that had gone through, and of course, it's destroyed the habitat, but it's also destroyed the future, right? And so what you're looking at is Yedema that's 40,000 years to 100,000 years old, now slumping in. It's not going to come back as it was. The ecosystem that was is now gone in this situation. You can see that it's turning into some water down here. And we have to think about how permafrost is interconnected to kind of lots of different things, right? Not just human beings, right? But we heard a little bit about this One Health perspective, thinking about permafrost and its connection to animal health, thinking about permafrost and its connection to the plants that were here before, and all the other species that depended on this area. And so this is an image showing kind of how big of a problem permafrost thaw becomes, how big of a permafrost thaw, you know, when you think about this, this collapsing and this space collapsing here, it disturbs a lot of different things. Right? Not only is it releasing tons of greenhouse gases that are going to affect global climate change beyond this local neighborhood, it's also affecting the water quality in this area. And so we've seen slumps like this. We've seen large slumping going into rivers. One of my favorite streams right at the Canadian-U.S. border on the Porcupine River. It's a kind of a treasured stream for Gwich'in people. Everybody knows this little stream, and it's got really sweet water. It's a favorite spot to stop when we go hunt caribou. Was destroyed by a slump like this, and so I know water is very important to all of us in different ways, and we all have our favorite water from someplace. This was my favorite water, and when we think about how permafrost thaw can destroy, basically as a cultural site for us. This is another image of showing permafrost lake drain and flooding. And so here on the top, you'd see like a standard lake that we have in our area. It could drain like that very rapidly. I've seen lakes just completely drain in the span of a summer. And then they come back sometimes, and you can see here where the lake might start flooding and then killing all the vegetation around the edge. And so this permafrost instability, permafrost thaw and instability has like kind of these really variable effects across the landscape. And so it kind of, you can't really depend on what's going to happen. And so that affects your hunting, your fishing, the area that you might be going to, that your family might be depending on. And so, you know, when we think about thaw and well-being in our water bodies and so forth in the north, are our freshwater sources really freshwater anymore? Right? when you can sit there and light it on fire like this. This is the same kind of scenario that when I was a boy muskrat trapping out in the Yukon Flats, we used to drop a hole into the ice and get our water, right? And now we're not getting water out of the lake, we're getting fire. And so thinking about this lake scenario occurring times a million, because there's over 1 million lakes just in the Yukon Flats where I live. And so, you know, it's easy to think about this thing. It's just happening in your neck of the woods. What does it matter to me? And that's how come I want to kind of decenter some of the discussion a little bit. And thinking about this image happening here, this kind of fire affecting Yedama image to what's happened all across the circumpolar Arctic. And so this is another way of thinking about it. So both of these images are the same amount of acreage, okay? So Oregon, California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico are equal to the amount that's burned in the circumpolar north in the last 20 years alone, except in the north, we have permafrost under that also. And so we have this kind of permafrost here, very fragile kind of permafrost that I showed you earlier in that first map with the two little people standing on the thick slice. This is where all of that is. And so we think about all of the kind of interconnected actions that are occurring between permafrost thaw to wildfire to animal health to human health to waterways to birds to migratory animals, kind of connecting up all parts of the earth really to where we're at. And so we have to think about permafrost not as just some piece of frozen ground in the north, but it's as the foundation of life on Earth, right? The permafrost is doing the heavy lifting of being a carbon sink for the rest of all of this to occur. And so we really have to kind of change the framework about how we think about permafrost and what it's actually keeping in the ground. Like I know of one graveyard that was in Eagle Village that collapsed, and that graveyard had smallpox in it and all kinds of stuff. And so we have a lot of different things that are interconnected that we have to think about. It's not going to wait. We have to, you know, this is something that is occurring even in the middle of winter. Once this permafrost and the Yedama starts thawing, it's melting even in the wintertime and emitting. As part of Gwich'in Council International, I serve as the co-chair of the Wildland Fire Initiative, trying to bring attention to the interconnectedness of wildland fire and its effect on permafrost thaw and Yedama. And, you know, there's more questions than answers, right? And the question that I'm going to leave all of you with is, how do you engage with this issue? How do you, as your entities, how do your people work with this issue? How do you propose to help, you know, our shared path forward? Because this isn't just the Gwich'in community's issue. It's not just an issue for the circumpolar north. It's an issue for the planet as a whole. And no matter where you are, these issues with the well-being of permafrost are going to affect your well-being as they've already affected me and my well-being and my family's well-being and my community's well-being and the food security of the Gwich'in Nation and it's the security of our communities. Those kinds of challenges are coming to you as well. And how will you help to address them before they get to your door? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for that talk. Really nice. So I think we have. I know we are a little bit late. It's supposed to be a movie screening, but I think still we can see if there are any questions in the audience for any of our speakers, any points of discussion you'd like to raise. Yeah, please go ahead.
More like not a question, actually. A lot of maps where I saw recently I've been to different and I think the recent theater opened up in North America and Russia as well. So, and also recent public conferences have also seen that there's a bit of embargo and creative data and stuff like that. And given that it's huge pieces of land, it's not coming to notice because there are no villages there, but the impact is still felt. So I just wanted to know in your recent research initiatives, how is the data flow happening between Russia, China, to these regions?
Well, I can speak to it a little bit, I guess. So I serve on two different working groups of the Arctic Council, the Conservation of Arctic Flora and Fauna Working Group and the Emergency Preparedness Prevention and Response Group, and also that's the and so I would say that, just recently have we begun to have like Zoom sessions and having Russian participation in those Zoom sessions has been very helpful. And so I think that there's a number of different things that are moving forward in that. I think that there's a long way to go still. It'd be better to have those sessions in person. It'd be better to have scientists be able to go and access some of these places that they've already been conducting research on for years. And then also kind of establish relationships. I think that that's really important. And I think that one of the things that's kind of not underreported is that in the pause and in COVID-19, and then also like the pause in the Arctic Council and re-engagement of Ukraine, there's been a real hit to young scientists, right? And so people being able to access and work with communities in Russia or have Russian young folks work in the Canadian and American Arctic. And so that's another kind of challenge with it too, is having people who are interested in that in the discussion to actually be pursuing things like a PhD or master's degree in the subject.
Some ways yes, the range. Do you see any additional action this kind of specifically?
I think the big one is making sure that scientists like Elchin and other scientists who are working on these issues are actually influencing the policy as far as like what happens in this next round with the IPCC discussions, right? And so whether or not what I've seen in the north, what you've just seen with that 430 million acres of wildfire and the subsequent impacts to Gedema and permafrost thaw, whether or not that science is reflected in IPCC protocols going forward in the data collection analysis, I think that I think that's a big one, because I think that will drive attention to the issue and awareness that there's this huge amount of stuff going on. I think the other part is that people need to be aware that much of this is unmonitored, right? And so what's happening in the post-fire disturbance area to permafrost and Gedema and stuff, we need local monitoring of that, whether it's coming out as methane, whether it's coming out as nitrous oxide. There's a humongous difference between it being released as carbon and nitrous oxide, right? Like something like 200 times the difference, right? And so, but we don't have that information. We don't have that information even in the United States. We don't have a consistent national policy. So I think trying to get people to understand that we need to have national policies, they need to be fed into these international systems. I think all of those things are reasons why within Council international teams, why the Arctic Council prioritized some discussions on, and I've heard both Elchin and Jenny and yourself talk about those same issues. And I also as far as having outward.
Yeah, I think I completely agree. It's like, I mean, for the science to be truly recognized that the UNFP facilitating, it is either comes from the IPCC. I think also like the Arctic Council has a possibility for individual parties to at least present knowledge that grows from that, because individual papers tend not to be recognized in a negotiation situation. Like that's the IPCC or parties that bring it forward. So I think the example of the Arctic Council project of piracy building knowledge that also those parties can actually present in negotiations with IPCC. So do we have any final?
Yeah. I think the big question is also whether it's a tipping point or a strong feedback, positive feedback. So is it possible that suddenly levels of carbon dioxide or either methane is released, or that it is a slow process along the temperature increase of the planet? I think IPCC is also wrestling with that question. I'm a focal point of the Netherlands for IPCC, so I'm very interested in this subject. Yeah.
So, sorry for taking the floor again, but so our local experience, like why Gwich'in have been involved with wildland fire now for like the last 10 years, trying to get attention to this issue and working through the Arctic Council and so forth, a very slow process, but is because our area warmed 9 degrees Fahrenheit already. Yeah. And so our area happened to warm more than the rest of the boreal forest, and then it went up in flame. And so 65% of our area burned. And, so you see those images that I showed you from our area, right? And which is why Woodwell is concentrating on Yukon Flats projects as well, because of the higher permafrost Gedemok interface there. The question that we have, which in Council International has been posing, is what happens when the rest of this large forest, the boreal forest, experiences, it catches up to us, right? As far as that amount of heating, right? And our assumption that we were going with is that you're going to see widespread wildfire, like we've seen in Russia many years that don't make Western media, 55 million acre season, 60 million acre season. The 40 million acre season in Canada is more familiar in the West, but it's not even like top 5 fire seasons in the last 20 years, right? So I would say Russia has experienced some of what we've already experienced in the Yukon Flats. It's just the rest of the Arctic, I think.
I would agree with that. I think that in general, permafrost thaw it's accelerating, and when it happens, when it occurs, it's irreversible. That most of a lot of the effect. But with that said, I don't think that there's not one single tipping point that will tip the whole permafrost system, because just as you said, it's warming at different rates and it's a massive area. So, but whenever you cross that local or regional threshold, you do get irreversible damage to the system, and that damage will stay there for decades or centuries. But then there's not one single temperature that will flip the whole system. So it is a tipping point, but it's many tipping points on top of each other. It's how I would view it.
Irreversibility, that's also part of the tipping point.
Yeah. So it's an accelerator, and it's irreversible. So you have those aspects.
Yeah, and I will add to that too, because like the permafrost thaw is a very gradual, slow process. If you again approach it from the classical viewpoint of view, right? This global climate models, they don't incorporate disturbances. If we incorporate disturbances, then the things might change more rapidly, more dramatically, and faster than we think. So that's why we're really pushing hard to bringing disturbances into the global climate models, so that we can see this tipping point and we can see, is that gradual thaw versus, the thaw that's induced by additional forces like disturbances. Like the forest fires, like previously it was that Gustav showed in Canada, like last year, I think, at the beginning of the summer, the amount of the carbon that were released and the amount of area that's been burned it's been already for the entire, what should happen for the entire summer, but it's only at the beginning of the summer. So we're talking about massive areas now that lost the protective layer because the thick organic layer that's at the surface in the areas where relatively warm, -1, -2 mean annual ground temperature, those areas, that organic layer is very vital for them. Once they lose that organic layer, it's like it will be like the process is reversing and it will go at much faster pace. But again, because it is a hard numerical problem, it is a hard computational problem, and incorporating that in a global climate model will a lot of resilience probably. That's why it's kind of hard to prove, but you have to start somewhere.
So yeah, with that, thanks to all of the speakers and thanks to all of you that came and listened. And now I think we'll transition into a film showing. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's coming up soon. And sorry we're a little bit late for that. Okay, thank you.